All right, welcome back. This is our second live stream of our series on Super Bowl betting. My name is Jack, Captain Jack. You can just call me Jack from Unabated.com, and we are talking about Super Bowl prop betting strategy tonight. I think it's going to be great. I think it's going to be a quick 30 to 40 minute presentation, and then I'm going to have plenty of time for Q&A. We'll round this out to be about an hour, give or take. And I think there's plenty of things to learn here, plenty of reasons why prop betting on the Super Bowl is often extremely advantageous to those who want to put in the work, and could be advantageous to those of you who don't want to put in the work, who want the easiest way possible. So welcome everyone who's watching on Twitter, watching on YouTube. If you're on Twitter, I won't be able to see any questions you post, but if you're on YouTube, you can use the chat function there and interact. There will be time for Q&A later on. So that said, let's go ahead and get started. I have this presentation here, betting Super Bowl props. And let's just go ahead and jump into it. So why Super Bowl props? I had a sharp bettor say to me some time back, I don't know what the fuss is about Super Bowl props. Look, books don't take action on props. Any sharp bettor doesn't waste their time with props. You move past props at some point. Well, that's true, but it's not necessarily true for the Super Bowl. And the reason it's not true for the Super Bowl is there is a definite higher limit on Super Bowl props, on prop betting in general, whereas before you might have a book struggles to take $500 on player props or game props on a football game. They'll take upwards of $2,000. I've seen limits as high as $10,000, and these are limits for everyone. This isn't just for the VIPs. And trust me, the VIPs will be able to get down whatever they want. But for guys that are aspiring sharp bettors who have previously found it hard to get money down on props, the Super Bowl is the one time of year where you can pretty much go at it with both fists and get your money down and do quite well, because there's still a lot of low-hanging fruit. And the reason there is so much low-hanging fruit is because there's really no one set market maker for Super Bowl props. Everyone kind of comes up on their own. And this creates a lot of arbitrage and line value. Now, I'm not a huge fan of arbitrage. In fact, I have an article on Unabated.com called The Arbitrage Mirage. But there is a lot of line value out there. And if you're the kind of person who is risk averse, you can just go around and shop arbitrage, where betting on both sides at the same time will produce a guaranteed profit. Or you can just go for the line value, and you can figure out which one has stepped out of line, and that's where the value is. There's just so much opportunity out there. For instance, I spent the last 2 days probably just shopping for line value. I haven't really crunched a lot of numbers yet. I have some numbers from years past, but for the most part, I was just looking at who was making a mistake, putting up a line, putting up pricing that wasn't quite in line with how the market should be. And one of the reasons we get that is it's a decentralized market. There's no Don Best screen for Super Bowl props. Now, technically there is, because Don Best does list Super Bowl props on their screen. However, they're really patchy. They only have 5 or 6 books. They're not quite up to date all the time, and there's always feed errors. And of course, there's other sites out there that do a decent job of kind of collaborating all of the prop bets that are available out there and get the prices across the board. But still, there's not one leader that the rest of the market is following, and as a result, you often have a very decentralized market in terms of how the pricing is going. And then the last reason that I think you need to be betting Super Bowl props is all of your friends assume you are. If you're like me and you go to a social function for the Super Bowl, you're going to be the guy that everyone says, oh, that's Jack. He sports bets. He bets a lot of sports. And you might not even be an avid sports bettor, but to your friends that don't bet at all, you're the guy they turn to, or the person they turn to, and say, oh, so what do you got on the game? Well, you're going to need to have something on the game. And to be honest with you, The side and the total, but for Cincinnati, LA, currently around 4.5, and 48.5 on the total. That's a tough market to crack. You can take your shot at that market, but there's a lot of surface area that the sportsbook has to defend against when it comes to props. There's hundreds and thousands of props out there, and they can't protect against all of them. They're going to have some weak points. And like I said, a savvy bettor, someone who is willing to put in the time and effort, can find those weak points and exploit them. So anyway, the point being is there's a lot that you can do, and you can definitely get into this as much as you want or as little as you want. And we're going to go over some basic strategy tips for you going forward this prop season to exploit it. Last year I did a broadcast about Super Bowl props, but I think I put it out like just a couple of days before the Super Bowl. And so a lot of the tips and tricks that I was talking about were already kind of baked into the market. There wasn't a lot of room for people to, use them. And so as a result, I don't think a lot of people got the full value out of it. So that's why this year I wanted to do this a little bit earlier in the season. So just in the past 2-3 days, we've started to see more and more props coming online at various sports books. Now, as expected, the online sports books, regulated online sports books in the US, the DraftKings, the FanDuels, they were very quick to market. But the props they put out so far have largely been simply what they would put out game to game for any NFL game. There hasn't been anything real special yet. And I think we're going to see some special things coming up in the days ahead. In the last 24 hours, Caesars put up a lot more props. They put up a lot more expansive list of these more esoteric props that people tend to feast on when it comes to prop season. And then tomorrow night, the Westgate in Las Vegas will unveil their huge prop offering at 7 p.m. Pacific time, 10 p.m. Eastern time. It was always an event for a lot of people to go to. They take $2,000 limits. You can make a bet, then you go to the back of the line, you go to make a bet, and that goes on for a couple hours, and people tend to do a lot of prop betting there. But those are the big points where a lot more of the market would open up when Westgate unveiled their menu. But so far this year, I think the regulated mobile books are definitely a little bit more ahead of the curve than some of the Vegas books, and they're able to get some of these out there a little sooner. Okay, so let's go over the types of Super Bowl props, because Super Bowl props break it down to about 5 different bet types. The first one is performance props. These are like player props. Will Cooper Kupp go over under? I think the line is currently 102.5 yards receiving in the game. These are pretty easy to understand. Typically, again, it's over or under, so it's a two-way market, which is good for the bettor. And then you have game props. Now, game props are things that'll happen in the game related to the teams or to the game itself. Will there be a score in the last 2 minutes of the first half? Will a team score 3 unanswered times? Will there be a defensive touchdown? And again, pretty simple to understand, and they're pretty prevalent. You're going to get hundreds and hundreds of variations on just player props and game props. But these are also things we see on just about every NFL game. Where the Super Bowl starts to get special is we get some cross-sport props. Now, cross-sport props are like LeBron James free throws made versus the number of points scored in the first quarter by the LA Rams. It's things that are going to require a little bit more figuring out, but they're very attractive, and we're going to talk about that as we get in here, about some of the kind of the ways to go about attacking those. And then, of course, there's multi-way markets. Now, multi-way markets are who's going to score the first touchdown, who's the Super Bowl MVP. That's always a very popular market. And these are markets that generally have multiple different ways that they could go. That's why they're called multi-way markets. And they tend to have a bit higher VIG baked in. So we're going to have to be careful with those. And we'll get to attacking those shortly as well. And then the final one, and the one that's probably the most popular in terms of the Super Bowl, are the novelty props. And these are the color of the Gatorade. How long will the national anthem be? All those things. And They've become very, very popular. They're usually lower limit. You're not going to get the full 2,000, 10,000, whatever you want to get down on the length of the national anthem, especially if somebody leaks the rehearsal for the national anthem ahead of time, like we've seen in the past. But novelty props exist pretty much only for the Super Bowl, at least in the regulated books, and they have limitations on how many they can offer and what types they can offer, and it varies state to state. But they're always a little bit of fun, and we're even going to talk about how to handicap those as well. So let's get into the basic strategy of betting Super Bowl props. Now, Super Bowl props have always been the sharps bet early, the public bets late. You're going to hear that a lot over these next 12 days or so. They're going to say, oh, the sharps have already bent all the lines into place. Then the public comes along right around Super Bowl weekend, and they tend to bet a lot of overs, and they push the prices up. And then the sharps come back and they bet the unders. Yes, that's all true. We're going to go a little bit deeper than that into why that happens. But it is a strategy. It happens every year that the public acts a certain way, the sharps act a certain way, and you need to be able to ride both waves. The other basic strategy is the sharps bet the unders, the public bets the over. Yes, that's true, and I'm not just talking the game score, the total. I'm talking on props. And there's a very real reason for this, is because people that are betting on the Super Bowl are going to be watching the Super Bowl. And why do you watch the Super Bowl? You watch because you want to see something happen. And so it's a natural inclination that if you want to see something happen, you want to bet on the over. Because if you're betting on the under or for nothing to happen, you're basically rooting for a boring game. And who wants to do that? So everyone's going to be saying, oh, yes, I think Burrow's going to throw for 300 yards, and I think Cooper Kupp's going to have 130 yards receiving, and Joe Mixon's going to run for 100 yards. And they're all going to have these inflated ideas of what they think a good Super Bowl would be, and a lot of that revolves around scoring and things happening and big plays. So it's a very natural tendency for public bettors to bet the over. Now, here's the basic strategy for what you need to do. And the first tip is you can't have too many outs. Literally, you need to be able to get down wherever you can get down on the Super Bowl. Now, for those of you in some of the regulated states that have a large number of sports books, this is a great year for you. This may be your first year of doing this with all of these different outs. Make sure that you have a funded balance in each of them in order to bet. Now, for those of you that are in some states that may not have as many options, you need to consider, oh, is it worth a day trip over to this neighboring state that may, or is it worth a day trip to fly up to New Jersey for a weekend or fly to Colorado for a weekend? It may be. It honestly may be. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit that you can attack, and I'm not going to tell you exactly how to do your betting, but I really feel like if you put the work in, you can profit strongly during the Super Bowl. And then the other thing you need to do in terms of a basic strategy is be organized and be prepared. So this is tough because there are so many prop bets out there, and they're coming out all the time, all over the place. You go back and forth between sites or between apps, and you can't find where that prop was that you saw last time that was at the top of the page because they've added on another 30 props on top of it. It can help to do a little F3 and search the page for something. That's a quick shortcut for a lot of people. What I like to do is I like to take notes. Now, I used to take all my notes on paper, and I'd have my little notepad, and I'd be like jotting down, okay, I saw this at this book, or this is the line at this book for this prop that I think I have a pretty good edge on. But now I do it all into a Google Sheet, and I basically just go in, and anytime I see something that just catches my eye, I'll jot it down into the Google Sheet, and that way I can search it a little faster. Basically, I in one cell, I'll have the note that I want to take. The next cell over is the price, and the next cell over is the sports book I saw it at, and then I can kind of quickly search around and see where they coincide and find value. It's not going to be easy, though, and you do need to put a little time and effort into this. There's a lot of days, especially in this early period here where everybody's kind of just putting up their prices. There's a lot of days where you get a little blurry-eyed just looking at everything on the screen, trying to scroll through and find things. And it's especially if you, like me, you compare things to years past. I keep a lot of the old prop sheets from years past. And so I'll think I saw this somewhere, and I'll realize later that, no, I was looking at last year's prop sheet when I saw this line that I was thinking of. So it can be a little tough. And then one last thing about the Super Bowl in terms of what you should consider in terms of a basic strategy is the Super Bowl has a very deep playbook. And what I mean by this is there's no opportunity cost in showing a formation or a play in this game, because your opponents this season aren't going to see it because this is your final opponent. In other words, you can go deep into the playbook. You can pull out the trick plays. Bill Belichick was one of the first ones to start doing this, and it's become almost a staple of all of his Super Bowls, is there was always some kind of trick play or odd formation. But we've seen it over the years, and of course the Philly special, and we've had wide receivers throw touchdowns and things like that. I strongly believe we're going to see more of that this year. We're going to see other trick plays and plays deep into the playbook. And the reason I bring this up is because you have to understand there's a finite number of plays in this game. And so one trick play takes one less target that might be targeting somebody like Cooper Kupp or Joe Mixon, because the trick play might be Cooper Kupp throws to somebody or something like that. So keep that in mind, because when you do your numbers and try to think of all the projected targets that a wide receiver might have, you have to kind of figure that, a trick play might be thrown in there that might take a target away from him. It's another reason why I tend to bet unders when it comes to player performance, but we'll get into that a little bit here. Okay, so let's talk about actually beating these props that I've talked about. So we're going to go through each one. And those of you that have watched me over the years and some of the other live streams I've done, you'll know I'm kind of fond of this illustration. And this is the money tree. And with the money tree, this is you. And you should be always reaching for things that are hanging low off the money tree, because that's the least amount of effort than trying to get to the money that's at the top of the tree. The money spends the same if you can bet the same. And so you try to pick off the low-hanging fruit from the money tree. When it comes to NFL props, especially Super Bowl props, those 5 topics that I came up with often play into how you should approach the props. And so at the top of the money tree are those multi-way markets. There's a lot of vig baked into them. There is a lot of uncertainty baked into them. You hear a lot of people talk about the Super Bowl MVP. That's a very tough market. There's going to be those that are pro quarterback, and they'll tell you that 7 of the last 10 years, the quarterback has won the MVP. And then there'll be those that'll say, well, yeah, but the years that they didn't, it was a huge payoff for people like Von Miller and Julian Edelman and things like that, that were non-quarterback MVP winners. And then a little bit lower on the money tree is the performance props, the player props. They take a little bit more effort to figure out, but they are often two-way markets, which is good. But even lower than them are the cross-board props. And the cross-board props tend not to be as advantageous to a lot of bettors, because they feel like, oh, I'm having to handicap 2 different things, especially I'm handicap basketball and football at the same time. Too much work. I'll stick to just handicapping something on the game. So they tend to shy away from the cross-board props. But lower than them are the game props. And the game props are things that happen just about in any football game. And these are the odds of them happening. And oftentimes that public bias plays into it and numbers get inflated. I think everyone knows about the whole no safety angle, right? For years, there was always value on the no safety because the public liked to bet the safety, especially when we had that run of like 4 and 5 years. The public loved the safety. Sportsbooks have kind of caught on to that, but there are some others that we're going to talk about in a little bit here that are like that. Game props where the public's going to bet one way, the line's going to move, and there is value for the sharps on the other side. And then the low-hanging fruit in this scenario are the novelty props. And we'll talk about the different ways you can go attack them. Again, they are low limit. There's not as much availability to make big money on them, but sometimes they can be fun to bet on. Okay, so let's start at the top of the tree. and start with MultiWay Markets. So let's think of a couple ways that we could possibly beat a MultiWay market. Well, we could line shop because everyone has lines up on who will be the Super Bowl MVP, who will score the first touchdown, and sometimes those lines vary wildly. And you can look around and you can find a good price on Joe Burrow MVP or Matthew Stafford MVP and look at it that way. And it's viable. That's very viable. And there are those that will do that and find ridiculously good prices. And then the other thing you can do is you can bet your narrative. Now, this is something that those of you who probably listen to Rufus's podcast, Bet the Process, you know their opening theme song, Find a Tout with a Narrative. So betting a narrative is not often good. It's not often the best way to do things. There's a lot of people that fool themselves into bets that because they're betting a narrative. But here's the thing when it comes to the Super Bowl is you can take a look at something and say, well, if this happens, then this might happen, then this might happen, and then the end result is this. I gave an example last year of the famous sharp bettor Ed Teach had made a bet on Jason Pierre-Paul to have the Super Bowl MVP. And the reason is because Kansas City had injuries to their offensive line. And if those injuries cause JPP to have multiple sacks in the game and maybe a forced fumble, well, then there's a pretty good case for him being the Super Bowl MVP. So you see how there's a chain of events there that that bettor had kind of figured in his mind in order to take a shot at like 60-1 on JPP to be the Super Bowl MVP. So that is a viable method. Now, when it comes to player performance props, our ability to handicap them and to beat them expands. So we have line shopping for arbitrage and middling. Again, these numbers are all over the place. There are arbitrage opportunities out there on the player props that are already up. And there's also middling opportunities. And by middling, I mean, you can say under 67.5 and over 61.5, and hope that player lands between 62 and 67. That's a viable option, especially if you're good at line shopping around and seeing where all the outlier lines are. You can also make use of a tool that we have at Unabated called our prop simulator. And what the prop simulator does is you enter in the projection and it gives you all the proper lines for the entire distribution of yardage. And so you can see that, oh, there's value on the over 61.5 and there's value on the under 67.5. And so I'm going to bet them both and get that positive EV middle. It's a very viable option. I know a lot of people that have done very well betting the Super Bowl and they just middle and arbitrage everything. They don't have any risk, any real risk associated with the game or any of the bets they're in. And it's worked well for them. Now they have to work hard to do that. There's a lot of line shopping going on, but at the same time, it's certainly a profitable angle. And when you compare that to the limits that you can bet on a lot of this stuff, it makes sense. And the other thing you can do with player performance props is you can leverage DFS skills and projections. Many people have come into sports betting from the DFS world. That's where they got their start. That's where they cut their teeth on sports betting. And so they may have a better feel for players than they do for actually teams and lines and totals and things like that. They have a better feel for yardage and usage and things that go into player performance props. You can leverage that. You can also leverage those websites that do those DFS projections, and they all do it for the Super Bowl game as well. I would recommend you take a blended approach. If you're going to use a website's projections, you go and find all the projections you can find, put them into a spreadsheet, take the average or at least kind of weight the average based on reputation of site, things like that. And again, you can use the prop simulator at Unabated. Once you get all these estimations in, put it in there and it'll simulate it through. There's a lot of ways that you don't have to get down and dirty with figuring out how to make a player projection. Now, I will also say that the best way to do this is to make your own projections. Those of you that tuned in last Friday night with Rufus, he was talking about his top-down method where he goes from this team will have this many possessions in the game. They will run this many offensive plays. This is their breakdown of run to pass ratio. This is their breakdown of how many, targets they have for this person, for this wide receiver, given a healthy lineup or given the lineup they're going to have, snap percentages, things like that. So he goes real deep and he drills down from the top all the way down to the player level. And this coming Saturday night, we're going to do part 2 of his his prop process. And we're going to focus a little bit more on certain props. In other words, we're going to come up with what's the current line on this player, and we're going to let him drill down all the way through his process. It's pretty amazing. But you can use that to do your own handicapping. And I call this quantitative handicapping because you are basically letting the numbers be your guide and going through and maybe creating some kind of spreadsheet to kind of get your projection for the game. And it's a viable way to do it. It's absolutely a viable way to do it. You probably are better at this than you think, because here's the thing. You just got to keep thinking of new variables and new ways that you can attack it. So rather than just take the person's yards for the year and divide by the number of games they played, why not look for similar opponents? So in other words, how has Joe Mixon done against defenses such as the LA Rams? The defense with the Rams is pretty strong on the pass, both on the pass pressure as well as on pass defense. Where they lack a little is on their rush defense. And how has he done on teams similar to that? And you can use a variety of tools to find out kind of grouping teams together. Football Outsiders has their DVOA rankings. That's usually a good way of finding similar teams based on characteristics of the offense or the defense. But there's plenty of ways to do this, and it's one of those exercises. It'll work if you put enough effort into it, but don't shortcut the effort. That's what my advice if you're doing your own projections. And then the last thing on player performance props is, again, bet your narrative. So again, you're thinking, okay, well, if this happens and then this happens, then the result will be this will happen. And here's the thing that came to mind this year. I'm very against same-game parlays. I've tweeted about it. I've talked about it. I don't like the SGP product at all. I think the hold on it is ridiculous for a lot of people. Players are getting just eaten alive by these SGP markets. But they do allow you to create a narrative and to bet your narrative when it comes to player props. I don't think it's a plus EV wager. They have so much VIG padded into them. But if you wanted to take a couple bucks, or if you had a promo where it's a $10 risk-free same game parlay, and you wanted to construct a narrative like that, that might be fun for some of you, and that might be profitable. I wouldn't go too heavy into it. I don't think it's worth your time. But at the same time, it does allow you to bet your narrative. Now, one word of caution when it comes to player props, and this is a big one. And this is a slide I used last year. I'm going to use it again. These were 4 props that were available at the same time for last year's game between Kansas City and Tampa Bay. And again, it involves Jason Pierre-Paul. Will Jason Pierre-Paul record a sack, yes or no? The number of sacks, 1 or more, less than 1. The number of sacks, over a half, under a half. The number of sacks, over 0.75 and under 0.75. Well, you look at this and you say, oh, look, there's an arbitrage opportunity, Jack. I could bet, yes, plus 145 over a half, and I could bet no, minus 115 on that yes-no one. And that's a great arbitrage opportunity. Except that sacks can be recorded as a half a sack. And what happens if Jason Pierre-Paul ends the game with exactly 1/2 of a sack? Does the yes and no win? Does the over a half and under a half, does that push? 1 or more, I guess that would lose, right? And the 0.75, well, that's the only clear one. The one that looked the weirdest on the screen at first is the only clear one as to how it should be graded. Here's the problem you run into with a lot of player props is grading is going to be inconsistent. It's going to be frustrating. There's quite a few disputes that rise up out of NFL player props after the Super Bowl on various sports books. If you're at a regulated sports book in the US, Well, good. You have the regulator who will then kind of make the decision for you whether this is the grading is correct or not. If you're betting offshore, you're at the mercy of the sports book, and they play their own judge, jury, and executioner, and it rarely goes in your favor. Just being honest, but it doesn't. So you need to be cognizant that there's going to be some controversy, and you should kind of figure that going ahead so that you don't set yourself up for an arbitrage where you could possibly lose both, such as if Jason Pierre-Paul had exactly half of a sack, the no would lose, certainly, and the over a half would lose, or probably push at worst. So you just keep that in mind. Make sure you kind of read all of the description on a prop. A lot of these books are now better at explaining how the prop is going to actually work, which I commend them for. I think that's the best way to do it. Okay, so let's talk about some crossboard props. Now, as we get into crossboard props, our number of angles of attack increase again. So we can do some line shopping, which is great. We can leverage our DFS skills and projections, which I said before. We can do the quantitative handicapping. We can make our own lines. And like I said earlier, a lot of people don't like that they would have to make lines for both one sport as well as the other sport, especially if it's two sports that they're not really that familiar with. That's fine. And you can bet your narrative. That's always going to be an option for a lot of people. But the last one, and I'll take my my face off the screen here, is to look for man versus team. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, a lot of times when you have sports bets that are cross-sport, you're talking about the team in one sport and a single man on the other sport. And I have an example from last year. The cross-sport props for this year aren't quite out yet. Once Westgate posts theirs, there's going to be some others that follow. But here are the cross-sport props from last year. And I'm going to draw your attention to who will have more Julius Randle free throws made or Tampa Bay Buccaneers first quarter points. This is man versus team. The entire team of Tampa Bay scoring points is not really dependent on much other than the offense and the defense and the game flow and things like that. However, Julius Randle, he could, twist an ankle. He could, be getting some extra rest or something. He could have an off game. He's a single point of failure in this prop. And it's far more certain that the team is going to come close to their goal, or at least kind of not be subject to the fragility of injury, than Julius Randle was. So I always look for, on these cross-sport props, I always look for situations where it's man versus team. And if I'm going to go under on something, it's going to be the man. And if I'm going to go in favor of something, it's going to be on something going over. It's going to be the team. And that's exactly how I always approach these. I always look for man versus team. Now, an important point to make on cross-sport props is they're always at the back of the prop packet. Now, the prop packet, I say that because in years past in Vegas, they would give you a physical packet of props. It's almost like a book of like 30 pages of prop bets, and you'll see guys just leafing through it nonstop. I always started at the back and worked my way front, because much like a buffet, like a dinner buffet, they put the food that's cheap up close at the entrance so that you might fill up on bread or salad or something like that. Whereas the filet mignon is way back in the back of the buffet, and you got to have filled up your plate with all these other foods before you actually get to the filet mignon. So it's sort of like starting from the filet mignon and working yourself forward is to start at the back of the prop packet. Now, if you're betting online at regulated or offshore books, try starting at the most out of the way prop prices you can find. Today, when Caesars put up their prop bets, I immediately scrolled all the way over and then scrolled all the way down and then worked my way back up. And I definitely found some value that was hidden back towards the back of it. And would I have found that value going from the front to back? Yeah, I probably would have. But I don't know if maybe I caught a line that hadn't moved yet in the process. And, I think it's a smart way to go. And I would encourage you to do the same. The next type of prop here is the game prop, where we're still working our way down the money tree. And again, we have a wide range of attack angles that we can use. We can do our line shopping for arbitrage and middling. There's always middling opportunities because a lot of these are yes, no, and we're seeing a lot of public money on yes and some values appearing on the no, because sportsbooks have to react to public money on the Super Bowl. You just have to. There's just too much of it, and they don't know any real source of truth for prop bets. So they have to sort of say, okay, we don't want to be too exposed on this. We're going to have to move our line a little bit. You can leverage your DFS skills and projections. You can do your quantitative handicapping, and you can also bet your narrative again. But you can also look for mispriced value. Now, what do I mean by mispriced value? Well, there's a lot of times when sportsbooks put up lines and they want to anticipate what the public will be doing. This year, I think a good example of that is, will there be overtime? Now, this is a classic pros versus Joes angle. The pros always bet no overtime. The public bets on will there be overtime. But this year, given these playoffs where just about every game's been decided by the last play of the game, a couple have gone into overtime, the public is going to be a little bit more thirsty for overtime. And I think they're going to definitely start to attack that number. Early on, I saw there was one shop that had the no on overtime at minus 1,200. And that's getting into value there. There was actually briefly some value, some arbitrage value, because I did see a shop that had 1,400 on the yes. They've since dropped theirs down, and probably due to some public betting. But I don't know that we're going to see a ton of value here, but this is one I'm going to keep my eye on, because there's probably going to be a shop or two as we get closer to game time, as we get to next weekend when the public's doing all their betting, that we're going to see the no overtime be of value. And trust me, if it gets down to minus 1,000, so I'm laying 10 to win 1, I'm going to take it. And hopefully we see it even lower than that. I'm not as crazy about those bridge jumper props as I used to be back when I was getting into the AP world. I used to always have a ton of money on no safety and things like that. But I don't enjoy them as much now, and I don't find the utility in them. But for this one, I might give it a play. Defensive touchdowns, another one that often gets mispriced. Will there be a defensive touchdown? The value is usually on the no, simply because the public wants to see a defensive touchdown. Teams that have made it to the Super Bowl often have done so because they, have this big defensive play or a touchdown that they've scored along the way that people tend to remember. They said, oh, that's going to happen again. Oh, Burrow is going to be shaky. He's going to throw a pick six. They always like to kind of come up with all these reasons in their head. But usually the defensive touchdown is typically a little bit mispriced, especially if it's offered for less than minus 300 on the no. So there will not be a defensive touchdown. Less than minus 300 is usually value, and I've seen it down as low as minus 230 or so in the past few years. So I'm going to be looking out for that one as well. Okay, let's talk about novelty props. And look, I don't spend a lot of time on novelty props, but they're going to be a topic of conversation all around social media. So again, our angles of attack have expanded once again. And now we have the line shopping, we have the leveraging DFS, we have quantitative handicapping, we have betting your narrative, we have looking for mispriced value, and then the final one down there is wisdom of the crowds. And what do I mean by this? Well, I mean, keep your ears open and your eyes open on social media for people that have recorded the dress rehearsal for the national anthem, or that may know what color Gatorade is going to be used, or have some kind of inside information into what the first song will be played during the halftime show. You can bet money on these. You can't bet a ton of money on these, but you can bet money on these. And yes, inside information does exist. However, be certain not to just believe every person, random person with 33 followers that you find on Twitter that's reporting this. Make sure you kind of look for a little bit of a crowdsourcing of information and go about it that way. But keep your eyes open. There's plenty of people that you can kind of keep Googling around or searching Twitter for to see if they, if somebody has said something that's believable. But I think like I said, if it adds enjoyment to the game for you, it's maybe only a $50 or $100 bet, it still might be fun for you to, have a thing on the color of the Gatorade or the length of the national anthem. You do look like a big time degenerate if you're at a Super Bowl party and you're there with your phone and you're timing the national anthem, and that's what you're staring at while everybody else is looking at the screen. You look like a big time degenerate, but that's okay. Okay, so let's recap what we just went over here in terms of the basic strategies. We talked about multi-way markets, and we only had a couple of ways to possibly beat them. We said they're at the top of the tree. They're a little bit tougher to get to. They might not be worth your time. We had player performance props, which gave us a few more options. They gave us a few more angles of attack, and we were able to kind of utilize some projections or possibly make our own. We had cross-border props where we were able to do some line shopping as well as looking for that man versus team angle. And we had the game props where we're looking for mispriced value. We're looking for things that come out early in the week in terms of prop bet lines and how to possibly exploit them. And then, of course, we had the novelty props where we could use social media possibly to find out ways to do all this. Now, if you're watching this so far and you've hung in there over the past 40 minutes or so, and you're thinking to yourself, Jack, that's way too much work. I don't want to put that much work into it. I found this video, I searched around, and all I want to know is a simple strategy. Can't you give me like a 5 minutes or less that'll take 5 minutes or less of my time as a way to possibly beat Super Bowl props? Well, lucky for you, yes, I do have a very simple strategy that I'm going to go over here, and hopefully you can use it to put as little effort as possible into beating Super Bowl props. Okay, the simple strategy is this. Bet late and bet the under on popular players. Now, let me just caveat this with saying that everything's nuanced. I'm not saying to take every under at 5 minutes before the kickoff, just bet under across the board. Look, I'm just saying if there's a popular player, chances are the public has bet the line up. I'll use the example of Cooper Kupp. The line right now is 102.5. That's going to close higher. People are going to bet into Cooper Kupp. They're going to look at his performance over the past few weeks. They're going to say, oh, this guy's tearing it up. I wouldn't be surprised if we go up to like 109.5 on Cooper Kupp, just from public action. And the value is going to be on the under. It's definitely going to be on the under on Cooper Kupp. So go ahead and, you can find Cooper Kupp, Joe Burrow, Joe Mixon. Basically, these guys that all the public's talking about. Remember, we had that angle of, they empty the playbook, so there might be less targets and less snaps directed at these players than there have been in the past, or that there are on average. And then the second simple strategy tip for you is, if you find a two-way bet, lean no. As I said earlier, the public loves to see things happen. You probably love to see things happen, but the value is probably going to be on the no. And when I say, yes, no, I mean, will there be a score in the final 2 minutes of the first half? Yes or no? Things that are basically a two-way option. And the reason I say two-way bets is because don't fall for anything that doesn't have the other side of the wager available to you. There's plenty out there. Will this, and this happen? We'll pay you 7 to 1, but it won't allow you to bet the no. Well, I can almost guarantee you the true odds of what they should pay you are probably more like 12 to 1 rather than 7 to 1. So you always should be looking for things that have a yes or a no and lean no. And more often than not, you're going to do better taking the no than taking the yes when it comes to the Super Bowl. Third thing for you. Favorite money line or underdog against the spread. And this is an old angle, an old adage that tends to hold true just about every Super Bowl. If you go into the Super Bowl wanting the Rams to win, you're a fan of the Rams, you're going to say, the Rams are going to win by 100. I don't care about 4.5. I'll lay 4.5. Sure, whatever. I'm taking the Rams to cover the spread. Whereas if you're betting on the Bengals, you're going, look, I love the Bengals, but the worst thing that could happen would be the Bengals lose, but I win the bet. I don't want to win that way. I want to bet a little and I want to win a lot. So I'd rather bet the Bengals on the money line, and I want to win 1.5, 1.6 to 1 for what the money I put down on them. And that's how the public's going to think. And they're going to bet so much on this that it's going to start to skew the lines a little bit. So that makes value appear on the other side. Now, it's not positive value, but it's at least less of a tax. In other words, so if the VIG is about 4%, it's shifting a little. So it's like 3% on the favorite spread and the underdog money line, and 1% the other way. So your thinnest negative value on a Super Bowl bet is always going to be on the favorite money line, the one people don't want to do, where they have to lay more money than they win, or on the underdog with the points. And that's just always held true. And so if you don't want to spend time and you want to pick a side, pick it that way. Bet the Rams on the money line or bet the underdog against the spread. And this is true, right up to game time. This probably has more of an effect up to game time than it does now. But we've seen this kind of skew in terms of action over the years. So, well, that's the presentation, and I did promise we'd do some Q&A. We got time for this, and hopefully there's some questions you guys have in terms of prop strategy, how props are made, or how handicapping is done on them. We'll take about 20, 30 minutes here and go through any questions anybody has. So if you're watching this on Twitter, you can go over to YouTube and join the chat stream there and input your questions. If you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and use the chat window, and we'll see what we get. Okay. Here's from AO. How do you trust your projections? Well, yeah. How do you trust your projections? You basically, that's kind of the thing with sports betting, is you have to learn how to trust yourself and how to make sharp projections. If this is the first time you've ever made a projection, yeah, you're not going to have a lot of confidence. But when you don't have a lot of confidence, you bet less, or you look for ways to confirm your opinion. And your opinion could be confirmed by taking a sample of all the other projections that are out there on the web and saying, oh, okay, I'm within line of that. If you think you have like a 50% edge on Cooper Kupp because you have him having 170 yards receiving, you're way off. So that's sort of a way to kind of test yourself. If the market totally disagrees with you, chances are your projection's not that sharp. But if some of the sharper books agree with you, or if some of the books agree with you and some don't, you might have something there. And if some of the projections that are available on various DFS sites agree with you, you might have something there. So it comes with experience, AO, and that's just how you got to approach it. Here's a question from my man Ben. Capwise is a pretty cool website. They do a lot of projections on players and some pretty good content there. Ben, does the yes or no strategy lean no change depending on if yes or no is the more likely outcome? Well, not necessarily, because again, that simple strategy is day of game. I haven't made any bets. I want to be part of Super Bowl betting. What should I do to just throw some bets down? Leaning no is usually going to be the best option, because the public will have probably already bet things on the yes side and move the price, a little bit, a lot, we don't know. Depends on the market. But for the most part, betting the no, or at least leaning no, is the best way to go. Now, obviously, if you have a strong feel for something being a yes bet, you're like, oh, this is going to happen. Okay, go ahead and bet your yes bet. I'm just saying, is if like you're panicking because it's 20 minutes to kick off and you feel like you need to make more bets on the Super Bowl, not that that's a great idea, not that that's a good way to approach sports betting, but I get it. There's a lot of people that bet the Super Bowl that don't bet the rest of the year, and this is purely entertainment tax to them. If they want to do well, then I suggest they lean no. The other angle actually I can put on this is, if you go to a party and they have a prop pool, which is popular at a lot of parties, in other words, there's 20 props on a sheet, and you have to like make all your picks, and whoever has the best score at the end of the night gets the pool of money. a good way to approach that is taking that contrarian view of leaning no on a lot of things, because chances are everyone else at the party, or the large majority of them, will be betting the yes. So there's another reason to lean no. It's your social gaming angles. Demers asks, what DFS prediction sites do you trust the most for predictions? Ooh, I honestly, I don't trust many of them. That's why I recommended that blended angle. I've looked around. One of the things that we're going to do at Unabated is we're going to have the ability to bring in projections next season and just kind of click them into the prop simulator. And I think that's going to help a lot of people kind of figure out which projections are, good and which ones aren't over the course of a season. I prefer to make my own, but I think fantasypros.com has a decent way of approaching it, in that they take a blended approach for you. So they have like 3 or 4 or 5 sources you can choose from to get a blended prop projection, and you can use that. I think that's probably the best way to handle it. Not that I have any affiliation with fantasypros.com, but I've used their product as sort of in testing out our own prop simulator. By the way, our prop simulator, I should let me do this real quick. Let me pull that up on screen, and you guys can see real quick how that works. Okay. And get me out of there. Okay, so this is our prop simulator at unabated.com. Now, Unabated, of course, is still a free product. There's plenty of resources you can use there at Unabated, and one of them is this prop simulator. So we could take a Cooper Kupp projection. Let's just say, I did look at Cooper Kupp projections earlier. I think he had something like 8.2 catches, receptions that are projected for him. And I think I saw 107 yards receiving is the projection that I saw earlier. And you can enter that in, you can simulate it. It's gonna run that game 10,000 times, and then give you a distribution of all of his output. And it'll even produce a histogram graph here where you could kind of scroll along it and see. But what this is useful for is, okay, so currently the line is 102.5, and as you see, very little value there, because it's going to be like minus 115 on either side. And this tool is saying, no, minus 105 to the under, plus 105 to the over. That's where it should be. And obviously you're not getting better than those prices. But if this line should move up to 109.5 later in the week, as I think it might, your under is going to have value. And this tool is basically saying minus 132 to the under. And you can actually view this, if you want to view this in terms of probability, that's 57%. So you're making a bet that has a 57% chance of winning. And let's just say it's at minus 115. Well, that's going to work out to be about a 12 to 13% edge for you in betting the under based on this tool. And with this tool is also going to have yard ranges. And we're going to see a lot of these bets over the course of the Super Bowl. Will Cooper Kupp have between 80 or 90? Will he have between 90 and 99? And things like that. You can use these tools to properly price those bets as well, which I don't think you're going to find elsewhere around the web, which is very useful. And of course, then we'll tell you, even though he had 106.5 as his average, his median's much lower. And the median is what a lot of sportsbooks use to price their prop bets on. And as a result, that's why you see, even though he's projected to have 106 something yards receiving, the lines are going to be lower than that, because the median is often lower than the mean when it comes to a positively skewed expectation, like a player performance. So just thought I'd dip into there on that. Probably not as useful, but I figured it was a good time to kind of plug that tool. It's kind of underutilized on our site. I think it's very confusing to a lot of people on how to use it. There is this link right here, Teach Me. A video will play. You got the transcript of the video. It tells you everything you need to know about using that tool. So go ahead and check it out on unabated.com on the props menu. Josh asks, where will those projections come that users will be able to pull in? And this, again, this is for next NFL season. This is our plans for what we call our Props 2.0 simulator. We're going to have a bunch of different projections from a bunch of different sources. We will be talking to those sources over the next few months and figure out who's willing to kind of let us draw from an API into our feed, who wants to just output to us. The benefit there, of course, is that they become associated with us in some way, that we're willing to put their projections up there. But it's all part of what we're planning to do as we enhance what we've got going on at Unabated. Pac-Man asked me, what was my first Super Bowl betting props? Let's see, it probably was back in 2001 or 2002. I think it was the year that the Baltimore played the Giants, and the game ended on a very odd play. Oh yeah, it was because Stanford Wong's Sharp Sports Betting came out in 2000 or 2001, and that's what got me interested in sports betting. And so it was one of the first Super Bowls after that was Giants and Baltimore, and the game ended on a very weird play. It was like a fourth down play, and they went for it, and the clock expired during the play, and that was the end of the game. So technically, they didn't get the fourth down conversion, but the game didn't end on a kneel down or something like that. And it was a very, very odd ending, and it affected quite a few props. But back then, I was betting the no overtime, the no safety. I was probably betting a few things to the over just because I was kind of new back then. I was using Stanford Wong had his Poisson distribution calculator. I was using that to price out a lot of things. So it was fun. I was learning back then. I probably wasn't a big bettor to start, but it was a learning experience. Okay. Andrew Miller asks, can you describe method for pricing shortest TD and longest TD prop? Okay, so this is interesting. This actually came up on the Unabated Discord server earlier this week. If you haven't checked it out, we have a Discord community there. It's a really supportive Discord community. Everyone's helping each other. It's really a fun place right now. Shortest TD came up because we thought maybe there's value on the under. And of course, when you think shortest TD, and it's over under 1.5 yards is always the line on shortest touchdown. You say, oh, well, defensive pass interference in the end zone, that's where you get the value on a shortest touchdown. And you're right. That's where you do get the value. But we decided we need to look at the referees. And specifically, you can't look at the crew, because you can find stats on a crew out there. You need to look at the back judge, the side judge, and the field judge, because those are the three officials that are around the end zone on any given play that heads to the end zone. And they're the ones that are most likely to call DPI, defensive pass interference. And so we took a look at that, and we found they're fairly average. They're fairly league average when it comes to DPI calls. Now, that doesn't mean DPI calls in the end zone, but referees tend to swallow the whistle in the Super Bowl just because people don't want the referees deciding the biggest game of the year. Ron Torbord is the head referee, and I think he made his crews this year made the third fewest penalty calls. So I wouldn't necessarily depend on DPI in order to get the win on the under shortest touchdown. However, we did find that pricing did vary a little bit, and there was some minus 130 out there. There was some minus 125 out there. And we looked at in years past, this generally gets bet up so that it's more like minus 180 and higher on the shortest touchdown being under 1.5 yards. So I think a lot of people did take a little bit of a flyer on trying to get the under 1.5, and hopefully it comes in for them. Now, in terms of longest touchdown, this is a little bit more work. And what you want to do here is you want to look on the propensity of these teams to take longer plays and longer shots, average completion length, things like that. I think what you'd find is probably the LA Rams are more likely to have a longer TD, but you need to look at what their longest TDs were versus certain opponents and find out where they were against similar opponents to what they'll face this week. Now, again, the Rams have a decent secondary. Joe Burrow's probably not going to have as much chance, but he does have Jamar Chase, who's kind of a great equalizer in that the guy's phenomenal in getting distance away from his the defenders around him. Anyway, the point being is I don't have a set way of doing that. That's one of those where you're going to need to go about it and look at all the pass plays and then line shop, because that might be one where you have a variety of lines, and the difference between 42.5 yards and 47.5 yards is pretty massive when you think about, getting stopped in that part of the field. You often would possibly go for it on like a 4th and 5 from the 45-yard line, whereas you wouldn't if you were just a couple yards back. So that comes into play as well. So I would definitely line shop when it comes to longest TD. I think that's a good way to approach that one. But I haven't done the numbers yet to figure out exactly what I think the line should be. Okay. Dan Abrams asks, if you bet a prop with a big edge but are limited to a small bet, should you bet more on it if they move the line and the edge is lower? Well, it all depends on how much of that small bet is, was this the line you definitely wanted to get? And the reason you wanted to get it was because this was such a fantastic number, or this is the only place that offered this bet. It's clear that if they move the number based on your bet, especially if they restricted you to a small bet, they're probably going to do it again if you bet it again. So, Dan, it's personal preference. It plays out differently for everyone. That's the sort of thing when it comes to sports betting, especially when it comes to the nuances of lines and books. I wouldn't say that there's any hard, fast rule when it comes to, dealing with a smaller limit. Personally, I found here in New Jersey, if I find something that's good and I go to bet it online and they're going to restrict me down to $50 on it, I just get in my car and I drive to Atlantic City and I bet it at a kiosks, and I can usually hammer it at a kiosk, selectively, like maybe $150 a pop again and again, and they don't notice. And I'm not going to the same kiosk and just hitting enter again and again. I'm taking a walk around the casino, coming back, hitting another kiosk. The art of sports betting. And I think that's the better way to go about it, is if you can find an easier way to get down rather than betting into an artificially low limit, that's the proper way to attack it, rather than hit it again and again and possibly just wreck that market and not get very much for your efforts. Big Les asked about making plays on obscure players scoring. Yeah, so the popular one this year, I think, is going to be this will an offensive lineman score. And the reason it's going to be popular is because DraftKings a couple weeks ago made it a prop, and they priced it really poorly, and everyone jumped on them. And I know it's already up on their site this year as will an offensive lineman score. I would definitely do some line shopping on that one. Look, we empty the playbook. I already talked about that. So I'm not saying there's not value, but again, I want to say you got to look for yes/no value, yes/no lines on things. So, will an offensive lineman score, but they only offer the yes? That's a red flag. Anytime touchdown and they have the offensive lineman listed, but there's no way to bet against it, that's a red flag. Circa, I remember when they do put up these sort of things, they do put up a yes/no line, and they probably will. But Circa's not going to come out with their props until this coming weekend. They're definitely taking the long game approach and waiting to put out their lines later this weekend. So there could be value there, but I wouldn't put too much effort into it. Jaden says, does the Super Bowl get pump faked at all by syndicates, or is there just too much public money? And yeah, there is too much public money. Look, the syndicates do have influence on NFL lines, but even the syndicates are looking at prop value when it comes to the Super Bowl. There's just too much money out there that they can kind of bet into, and there's so much public money that they can have a field day with the Super Bowl. But the syndicates aren't doing things like, driving the total down right now in order to pop the over later. If they find value later on the under, it's not because, or the over, it's not because they purposely drove the market down. It would just take too much money, too much effort to move the entire Super Bowl side or total market. So they tend not to do much with it. But I mean, they are in the prop market. Look, Spanky has told me for years that he would love it if Rufus would just agree to go into the Westgate and bet the wrong side on a couple props, and then Spanky could send in an army of guys to go in and clean up, because the Westgate absolutely moves their lines based on what Rufus is betting. And but as far as I know, that has never happened. Speaking of Westgate, signed collectibles 1, which was my favorite, versus signed collectibles 7 was not quite as good. Do the Westgate props get posted online for other states they operate in at the same time as people not in Vegas? Yes, apparently they do. I was just checking out their website today. They have a bunch listed with a lock sign on them that I assume will unlock. Probably not right at 7 p.m. Pacific time tomorrow. They'll probably wait like 2 or 3 hours. I kind of recall them saying that they're going to post online a couple hours after they have the unveiling there at the Westgate. I'll see if I can clarify that. But for the most part, you will be able to bet the same props online that you can bet in person at the Westgate in Vegas. The caveat being, certain props are not available in certain states. Certain states have laws against what can be offered as a prop bet. And so that might come into play. So I just want to say that, I saw something that's available in Westgate that's not on their online app. That could be the reason why. Take a few more questions here. Andrew Miller, for team total, do you price as a derivative of implied team total? Yes. I don't get involved too much into this, but I know Rufus does, and we're going to talk about this on the live stream coming up this Saturday night, February 5th, 7 p.m. I think it'll be 7. I got to check with Rufus what time works for him, 7 p.m. Eastern. This is exactly how he does it. He takes it as a function of the implied team total, which is part of the total when you slice out the spread and the projected scoring. So, a total of 48.5 is going to have this many total touchdowns, and it's going to have the distribution is going to be this and this. And that's the beauty of NFL scoring, is that it's very regimented, and it fits it's almost like it's a jigsaw puzzle with really distinct pieces that all have to fit a certain way into making the puzzle complete. And you can kind of fit it backwards and find out which combinations work best for sports betting and for team totals and things like that. And that plays into a lot of things when it comes to betting on game props in the Super Bowl. First downs, that's based on the total, basically. Will there be a fourth down conversion? Will there be, how many points are going to be scored? How many touchdowns in the first half? How many field goals? Things like that. It all kind of works into that larger picture of based on the projected score of the game. So that's a good way to kind of look at it. Is start there and go backwards. So the team total on this game is, what is it, for LA is something like 27-ish. So, chances are it's going with 3 touchdowns for LA as the kind of the median number. And you kind of work it back from that. So see if there's any other questions here. Pac-Man asked about any live betting props. I'm sure there will be some live betting props. I will say this is something I haven't tipped the hand on yet. During the Super Bowl, you probably want to come check out Unabated. We're going to have the live line from Deck Prism up on our page, up on our odds screen during the Super Bowl. You're going to be able to get the live Deck Prism odds, which they're the masters of in-game pricing. So it'll be a good reason to kind of have our site on in the background while you watch the Super Bowl. Quick question here from Sign Collectibles. Would you bet under a half a yard rushing and receiving TDs and under a half a defensive player INT for most all players? Well, see, okay, so here's the thing. You can't really apply a blanket approach when it comes to sports betting in general, but especially when it comes to like something like this, where you figure the market is going to be priced so that if you were to bet all under, you're probably not going to come out ahead unless there's a game like we had a couple of years ago, the 13-3 game, where they all would have gone well under for LA. It's kind of risky to take any kind of blanket approach, and I've kind of tried to steer people away from that when we talk about the Super Bowl and talk about the approaches. You don't want to really take a blanket approach. You want to take a measured approach. And one word of caution I would say about betting the Super Bowl, and it's something that I've run into many times in my career, is watch for correlation. Watch for having this narrative in your head of how things are going to go, that, look, LA is going to dominate the game, so therefore they're going to pass less, they're going to run more. Burrow's going to be playing from behind, he's going to throw more, and that's how you bet all of your props, right? And then the game starts and you realize, like, everything could be a house of cards and fall on top of me here, because if this game doesn't go exactly how I say it's supposed to go, I'm screwed. And trust me, I've been on, I don't think I've ever had a losing Super Bowl, at least not a losing Super Bowl weekend. I may have had a losing game here and there in the past, but if I do, it's because I bet on some kind of correlation and it didn't line up, and it came crashing down on top of me. So this, that's the sort of thing that you got to be careful about. So be careful about blanket approaches. I think we're going to wrap it up here. We've run about an hour and 10 minutes. I don't want to run it too long. Somebody asked, will this video be available for replay? Yes, it will be. I know there was an issue last week. We had the live stream and then we had to take it down briefly afterwards and then put it back up later. But this one, I didn't say anything I shouldn't say that I know of. And so this is available for replay right away. Thank you all for joining me. Coming up on Saturday, we're going to have part 2 with Rufus, and which he's going to talk a little bit about specific props. He's going to go real in depth on some player props. That's going to be really good stuff. If you're the kind of person that want to prepare mentally, not only for the Super Bowl, but for next season and how you approach prop betting during the NFL season next year, you can learn a lot from the live stream coming up this Saturday night with Rufus. And then next week on the 8th, we're going to have a live stream. It'll be Rufus and I and maybe some friends talking about the game in general, maybe taking a lot more questions, maybe working through some more specific props, maybe talking about some of Rufus' experience getting down. He's out there in Vegas now, but I think he heads down to Arizona sometimes and bets at some of the online books that are in Arizona now. So we'll ask him how that's been going. And then on the 12th, the night before the Super Bowl, we're going to have what I like to call Super Stream. And this is, maybe I should put this up here real quick. This will be guests and predictions and surprises. This will be basically anyone who has anything to do with the gambling industry. We're going to have bookmakers, we're going to have bookies, we're going to have bettors, we're going to have pundits, we're going to have podcasters. I'm running low on my alliteration, but you get the point. We're going to have a lot of different people come into the room. It's going to be a fun time. We're going to have people that don't get on camera much. They'll come in and give us a prediction on the game, give us a pick, and we'll be logging those picks as we go through the night. Look, there's not going to be a ton of value left on the Super Bowl by the night before, but I kind of wanted to have that, as I thought that would be a kind of a cool thing to do. I did a sports bettors talk show back about a little more than a year ago, and it was a lot of fun, and I kind of want to replicate that again. So we're just going to have people drop by, say hello, hang out, chat a little bit. There might be drinks involved, who knows. That's the night before the Super Bowl, February 12th. I hope you'll tune in for that. But for now, go out there and find some wagers, guys. There's a lot out there right now. Keep looking around. I think you're going to find some value. But That's it for tonight. Good night.